Okay, hi everyone. For introductory purposes, my name is Samuel Gekara. Today there's been quite a lot of material or conversations around tax, and we're here to continue the conversation around tax. I saw Commissioner Rispa came and spoke to you guys. She certainly is someone who is good to know and good for people who want to practice in the tax space to know. Then we've just come from a session with the KRA or someone from the KRA legal team, Hilda, who's given a very good presentation about what happens in KRA, and you've gotten to hear about tax from a KRA perspective. And that is because there was Commissioner Rispa and there was Hilda, and you've not had it from a tax lawyer's perspective. So for introductory purposes, Lucy and I are tax lawyers, and all we do is tax. I don't know about real estate, and I mean, you've attended various panel discussions, the IP lawyers, and the future of the law is heading towards specialization. I mean, I see nowadays the number of students or graduates that are churned out every year. We are talking about probably an average of over 1,000 a year from KSL. So if you look at it that way, then the traditional forms of legal practice, you know, the traditional bread and butter litigation, conveyancing, and what's the other one? Just litigation and conveyancing is really being debunked, and we're really seeing a lot of people specializing or the need to specialize in specific fields. And if you go to more developed countries like the UK, you'll find that tax lawyers are or tax attorneys in the US are quite well regarded, and in other countries, tax is really a playing field for lawyers. And we're slowly getting there in Kenya, but I mean, sometimes I tell my parents, and it's unfortunate I come from a family of very many lawyers, and some including senior counsel who are proper litigators, and they ask me, what do you do? I tell them I'm a tax lawyer, and they're like, we don't understand that. And I get it. Most of you guys in this room might not understand what a tax lawyer is and what a tax lawyer does on a day-to-day, and we're here to take you through that from a private practitioner's perspective, assuming once you finish from KSN and you get admitted, you'd either want to there are various opportunities, and they'll be in-house. You can work at KRA. You can open your own farm. You can work at a farm that does tax. And I mean, at least a lot of farms in Kenya are now starting to get the conversation around tax law. A lot of farms have started investing in tax practices. I mean, I think if you go to the top tier farms, you'll see robust tax teams of, I'd say, about an average of over 6 lawyers who are specialized in tax, which is quite nice to see. So that was just a general introduction about the need to specialize and where the law is heading from a specialization perspective. Now, I'll just also talk a bit about the farm. So I don't know how many of you in this office know about IKM Advocates, which is part of the DLA Piper Africa group. And just by a show of hands, anyone knows about IKM Advocates? Yeah. So we're a corporate or a commercial law firm or a business law firm or that aims to serve various businesses, and ideally, or just I'll give a highlight of the firm before I go into tax and what specifically we do. We are quite specialized, and lawyers in the firm are quite specialized in what they do. So you will not find me handling a real estate matter or, for example, setting up a company. There's guys who will do that. So the firm is divided into 6 practice groups. The first one is our dispute resolution practice group, which basically does litigation and arbitration and dispute resolution. They also do corporate investigations and matters like that. We have our bank, real estate and finance practice group, which does your traditional, banking work, conveyancing, and finance transactions, where lawyers are required on finance deals, and That's our real estate practice. We have our commercial employment, intellectual property, and technology practice, which basically does deals in a lot of the commercial agreements you'll see around intellectual property and telecoms law. I think our data privacy team is also situated in or data protection and privacy team is also situated in that team. We have our projects, energy and infrastructure practice. This deals with complex like projects, which would basically be it'll involve first a lot of the procurement. We have the traditional type of procurements. We have the PPPs. We have direct procurement. So the various procurements under the Public Procurement and Disposal Act, and in addition to that, they deal on a lot of the projects like energy projects, solar projects, renewable energy projects. So that will be our projects, energy and infrastructure practice. So they support clients on projects deals, energy deals, and infrastructure deals, PPP arrangements, ensuring, setting up privately initiated proposals. I'm sure you saw one, the Adani Holdings one, which everyone would know about, who wanted to do some work on our airport, but that was not us. I'm just giving that as an example of a privately initiated investment proposal. Then I think we have our corporate practice. This deals with mergers and acquisitions, private equity, real estate investment trusts, and basically interactions with the various regulators around the capital markets, competition authority on deals. And finally, we come to our tax practice group. And we hope from this presentation, you'll just get a brief understanding of what tax lawyers do. I think you've heard from KRA. You've heard what KRA do. And I'm here to debunk, and I've told Hilda just as she was heading out, that we disagree with their statistics of a 90% win rate, because in our cases, we have an over 95% win rate, but I mean, they could be talking about their general success at the courts. But before we get into the substance of the presentation, I just want to, I know a lot of you have a lot of misconceptions about tax law, and KRA talked about some of the misconceptions young lawyers, and not even young lawyers, even senior lawyers have about tax law and tax practice. And I just want one person or two people just raise their hands and tell me, what do you think when tax law comes to your mind?
Before I specialized, I used to think tax law is very technical and it's for accountants. So it's just all about numbers. I didn't see the legal aspect in tax law. So yes.
Okay. Thank you, Lucy. I think that is a huge misconception for a lot of lawyers, whether senior or junior, or even accountants as well. Sometimes accountants think tax is for accountants, but the first and biggest misconception is that tax law is for accountants. And I think KRA alluded to this in their presentation, and we'll get to the next slide where we'll explain why tax law is really the space for lawyers to play in. These misconceptions, I've gotten them from interviewing a lot of pupils who come to our firm, and during the interview process and the pupillage process, pupils that rotate through our practice, this is what they've told me or told us about what they think about tax before they interact with our practice. The tax involves complex maths and you need to be a numbers person, that there is no legal work in tax law. Tax law is only about filing returns. And the shocking one was that there are limited opportunities for tax lawyers, or that tax law is only about taxes. All these are misconceptions, and you'll get to understand as we go through the presentation how this is about. So the first thing and the first misconception we want to debunk is that tax is based on the law. It is for lawyers, and it is for lawyers to take it up. And a number of law schools nowadays offer tax as a unit for study in campus. Just by a show of hands, how many have done tax law or tax law? I don't know whether, is it taught at Kenya School of Law? It is not? Is it taught as a unit on its own, or is it within commercial transactions? It's within commercial transactions. Okay. So tax is based on the law, And I'll just refer us to our constitution very fast. Not to make this like a study session where we are studying like a class, but Article 210 of the Constitution says that no tax or licensing fee may be imposed, waived, or varied except as provided by legislation. So every tax that is charged on every person, any transaction, has to be based on a law. There's a legal framework, various laws around tax. Kiare alluded to some of them in the presentation. Lucy will also just do a quick highlight of some of the tax laws we have in Kenya. But as you can clearly see, it is based on legislation, and we are all lawyers, or we are studying to be lawyers. So why shouldn't we practice tax? Why should we leave tax to be the preserve of accountants and not do it? And there are very many opportunities in law. There's a lot of opportunities in tax law. There's a lot of money to be made in tax law, and we'll get to that. So Lucy can just do a quick highlight on the legislative framework, and I'll come back.
Okay, thank you, Sam. So, of course, since we know that tax is based on the law, there has to be a legal framework, which is basically where do we go to understand what is being imposed and also the authority to impose it. So we have our 5 laws. We have the Income Tax Act. This is basically, it covers basically all the taxes in terms of any income that is derived in Kenya. We have the VAT, which I know most of us know, the 16% that you see when you buy something in the supermarket or when you go to the salon or a restaurant. We have excise duty. This is what we see on, this is the act that provides for the excise. And this is basically what we see in commodities like alcohol, cigarettes. Then we have the Tax Procedures Act. This is basically the act that provides for what do you do when you have an assessment. How do you file your taxes? They talk about the PIN, basically the step-to-step sequence of how to administer all of these taxes. We have the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act. This might not be very familiar to most people, but it provides for the law on customs. So we have our import duty, we have the levies that you pay when you bring in a commodity into the country. So this is our bread and butter as tax lawyers. So if you're interested in doing tax law, this is basically your Bible. You need to really understand what these laws say. And moving on, just because I know anyone who doesn't, if you don't really have an idea about tax law, your quick question would be, what are the general types of taxes in Kenya? And just to give you an understanding of what we do, just an overview of what we do, not to make it too technical, but it will be beneficial. So we have the 6 main heads. We have what we call the corporate income tax, and this is imposed on entities. So I want you to think about companies, think about branches, think about anything that is incorporated. So we can even have NGOs. They'll be subject to corporate income tax, and the current rate is at 30%. So you'll have companies paying tax a 30% rate on their profits. That is, of course, after expenses, what you get. So if your profit is $1 million, 30% of that you give to KRA. Then you have withholding tax. Again, if you're not familiar with taxes, you probably don't know too much about withholding, but even from what the name suggests, you withhold it. So as a payer, if I'm paying this beautiful lady over here money for a technical service she's given me, maybe she's come and surveyed my land and I'm paying her. Before I pay her, I'm going to keep a percentage of that payment and give it to carry. So you basically, it's at the source, it's like an advance tax. So we have withholding tax, and that is subjected on payments such as interest, if you have a loan, dividends, a company, if you're giving out your profits at the end of the year. We have royalties. This is anything that to do with intellectual property, management and technical fees, professional fees, like us as lawyers. when clients pay us, they withhold a certain percentage. But the rates vary on the resident status. So they're non-resident and resident rates. And a resident person is basically if you have, if your PIN status is resident. But I don't want to make it too technical, but I want you to understand the concept of withholding tax and the payments that are subject to withholding tax. Then we move to employment tax. I'm sure most of us know about pay, and this is the painful one that most of us feel every single month. So we have pay, it's divided into 5 bands, and it's at a rate, and the bands are subject to tax at between 10 to 35%. We have VAT, I don't need to talk about that. We know the 16%. We have excise duty on certain commodities, as I said, like alcohol and tobacco. Then we have customs duty. So when you're bringing on, when you're importing a good into the country, there are rates that you're supposed to pay, and the same applies when you're exporting goods out of the country. So that's customs duty. Everything we do is under those 6 heads. I hope that's clear with everyone. But we'll share the slides. Then we can move on to the opportunities. So what do we do with these taxes? They're jobs, and we derive income from debunking and from interpreting and from applying all the laws that I've just highlighted for you. Now I'll hand over to Sam.
Okay. Thank you, Lucy, for just that quick highlight. We didn't want it to be too technical, and we understand it can get quite technical. Let's just talk about opportunities for tax lawyers. And before I go into that, I'll just tell you like probably a breakdown of what a typical tax practice looks like. So the first, this will be the primary revenue driver for a tax lawyer, is tax dispute resolution. So just like we have the traditional dispute resolution, and I think in the previous presentation and in the panel discussion by Rispa in the morning, she alluded to tax disputes between the revenue authority and taxpayers. And because tax, as we mentioned, is based on the law, there arises a lot of disputes around interpretation of particular legal provisions in the tax laws. So we'll have KRA having a position on what they think is the correct position, and most of the times, generally, their interpretation may want to be the one that leads to collection of more revenue, and there is probably what your client interpreted it as, and there is probably what you interpreted it as, and so you can just see, like, that is the primary. There's a lot of work in the tax dispute resolution space, and for tax lawyers, and particularly from individuals to the very largest corporates you've seen. We typically will deal with disputes in billions of shillings. I think probably the largest dispute we've ever seen is 100 billion shillings, and sometimes the demand has been bigger than a company. What do you do in such an instance? The risk is so huge that internal business functions have started understanding that tax is a key part of legal. So if you go to a lot of the in-house, and I'm talking about the big corporates, they have realized that the tax is no longer a finance risk, but it is a legal risk, because, and part of this is because once these disputes move from the tax appeals tribunal, they go to the high court, they go to the courts of law, and the way our laws are structured, you have to have all your arguments or your case presented at the first instance when a dispute is raised. So in-house legal teams are now hiring tax lawyers as part of their in-house legal teams, and because we work with these clients and these corporates, and some of them are our contemporaries, our friends, there are opportunities even in-house as a tax lawyer. And I'll just give a quick overview of where the opportunities are. So there are opportunities in law firms. Yeah, a lot, as I mentioned, a lot of the top tier law firms and upcoming law firms are really investing in the tax practice and in building robust tax practices. We have and this does not mean you have to join a law firm. You can set up your own law firm and start as a tax practitioner. Obviously, you may need a lot of knowledge or to do additional studies, maybe at the Revenue Authority, to understand what tax law and how to go about it and where the opportunities are. And because at the end of the day, we're not seated here to become charity institutions. How to make money from the business of tax. of tax law. So we have opportunities at audit firms, and just to give a quick background about myself, I started out just as I was finishing campus, applied to the big four firms. I got offers to PwC, KPMG. I ended up joining KPMG, worked there for 3 years, then realized, yes, tax is law, but I was being boxed into, doing a lot of mathematical computations, and I wanted to work at a law firm that did tax, and that's how I moved to IKM. You can work in policy. There's a lot of work in tax law policy because tax law is very dynamic. Every year we have, changes. We have a lot of things, globalization, technology changing. So we have a lot of work in tax law policy to formulate tax laws. There's work at KRA, and Hilda in the previous presentation alluded to that you can get opportunities to work at KRA. You can work in research and academia. There's a lot of work and a lot of, I'd say, non-resident institutions that are interested in tax justice that are funding a lot of research in Kenya. So if you're interested in academia, there's also a lot of work in tax research and academia. There's international opportunities which relate to international tax because, and we have double tax agreements between Kenya and other countries that seek to prevent double taxation or income being taxed twice in different countries. So we have opportunities to work internationally. We've seen disputes with some of our international clients where assume their income is subject to tax in Kenya and maybe it's subject to tax in another country like Denmark. And we have to work with international counsel to get the Denmark position. So there's a lot of work even internationally. There's big four firms even internationally that do tax. Like if you go to KPMG UK, I have a lot of friends who we worked with at KPMG who moved to London and PwC London, some in the Cayman Islands, just doing tax work. We have work in-house within our corporate legal team, as I mentioned. Tax is a legal function, and get work within in-house as a lawyer in-house within the legal team. So before I move on to the next slide, just what do we do as tax lawyers? I think the first one I mentioned was tax dispute resolution. Then secondly, as I mentioned, in the firm we have various practices and we have clients doing various deals. So you'll realize in all of the deals, and before all the deals are structured, they all start from the tax practice. So how is this deal? I'm investing $100 million into Kenya. I want to extract my money in a tax efficient and optimal manner. I want to ensure my profits, to maximize my profits, because everyone is in business and everyone wants to structure their deals in the most tax optimal manner. So we do a lot of advisory work. And all those taxes that Lucy mentioned happen to play because you have to understand, okay, if I do this, what's my tax implications? How does this, how do I arrive at the best option for the client? So there's advisory. We do advisory on various matters. So it will be on sale of land. Someone is selling land, they want to see, can I get a CGT exemption? How do I structure this deal? And in all the practices in the farm happen to work. We almost serve every practice in the firm, including our HR team. They'll ask us, okay, the finance bill is out, the taxes have been increased, when are we implementing from, how do we implement this? Our finance team will ask us, okay, so the government has introduced new VAT on this service, how does it affect us? We advise every practice in the firm. Like real estate, there's a land deal, we'll advise. There's a merger and acquisition. There's obviously tax implications on the merger. Is it an asset deal? Are they buying it by way of assets? So what are the tax implications there? Is it a share deal? How do we optimize the transaction? So basically, we serve all the practices, and we do a lot of work with the Kenya Revenue Authority because as a tax lawyer, your regulator is the Kenya Revenue Authority. So we appear before the Kenya Revenue Authority on a lot of matters for clients, licenses, tax. There's private rulings. You want to get certainty on how the Revenue Authority will interpret a transaction. So we work a lot with the Kenya Revenue Authority, and we do, everything. We'll do registrations for foreigners, deregistrations for foreigners, for companies. So if you look at all of this, I tell you guys, there's actually quite a lot of money to be made, and you'll see big four firms have big practices that make, I'd say, up to billions of shillings. I know a big four practice that makes billions of shillings in revenue just from tax work. Law firms are catching up. in terms of revenue and closing down the space on accountants, and that's why we're here. We're trying to convince more of you guys to see if if you can join the tax law practice. There's opportunities for you guys in the practice. So I think the tax dispute resolution process, I think we can skip this. I can see the time because this was mentioned in the previous presentation by KRA, where they went through the process and how you go about it. But just as you look at it, like, so the Tax Appeals Tribunal is the only forum in which accountants can appear in the tax dispute resolution process. So after this stage, accountants drop off because they cannot appear before the High Court, they cannot appear before the Court of Appeal or before the Supreme Court. So, and how it started to be like is that people are realizing that formulating the tax strategy at the earliest on, you need tax lawyers. So lawyers are now starting to get involved from the preliminary audit stage with KRA, the assessment stage, the objection stage. So we have disputes or major disputes with various banks, telcos that we've started with from the preliminary stages. And I think most of the disputes typically end on appeal at the High Court or at the Court of Appeal. We rarely do tax disputes get to the Supreme Court unless we have one that is affecting the industry, like there's one on card transactions that is public knowledge, that is at the Supreme Court. So, but you see generally in this process that KRA mentioned the tax opportunities within KRA in the tax dispute resolution process, that they appear in tax disputes representing KRA. But on the other side, clients need a lawyer who will represent them in those disputes against KRA at the various stages. So that is where the opportunity in the tax dispute space arises. So I'll just finish up with what do you do to become a good tax lawyer? And I'll open it up for questions. I know the questions is probably where we might take some time, and I don't want to overstretch my 30 minutes, so we have sufficient time for questions. So tax is very dynamic. Every year, and as tax lawyers, we have to unlearn, learn, relearn, delete, depending on what happens. Like this year, we sat down in the office, we sat down in boardrooms, analyzed the Finance Bill 2024. We had started advising some of our clients who had transactions in the pipeline. This is how the bill will affect this transaction, but we know how that happened. The bill did not pass. But every year we have a finance bill, and in certain years we'll have, on top of a finance bill, we have a tax laws amendment bill, like we have a new tax laws amendment bill. You can have a miscellaneous amendment act that amends various tax laws. So there's a lot of reading and updating yourself to be conversant with the tax laws, because they do change very frequently. And part of the reading in tax is also learning how to apply tax to transactions and to practical situations, because as much as tax is the law, it's charged on, let's say, profits. So you have to understand how to read financial statements. How does this law affect my client's profitability? So we read a lot. Like areas like transfer pricing, like if you have a transfer pricing dispute, you really have to ensure you're quite aware of the transfer pricing methods. And it basically involves a lot of continuous learning, analytical skills. I don't know how to build analytical skills other than by experience and by getting into transactions, seeing how taxes apply. But you need to be able to analyze. And as I said, we'll simulate. A client will come to us and tell us, I want you to structure this deal for me. So we'll come up with like 5 structures. And we'll tell them, okay, so this one you can set up a subsidiary in Mauritius, you can set up one here, this will be the implications. If you do this, you move this money here, this is how it will look like. So you have to be able to draw the clear picture. And in all of our offices, we basically have whiteboards, because we draw a lot. We are drawing, we're trying to figure out how things work. So we analyze a lot. You have to be, solve problems, be creative, think outside the box. This money cannot be moved here. Maybe this country has foreign exchange restrictions. You can't get your dollars out. So it's basically just much more than filing returns. Tax is about much more than filing returns. It's quite interesting. And tax law, unlike what other people might have said, I think tax law, from my experience, you work with all the practices. You get a taste of everything. You understand corporate law, you'll work on mergers and acquisitions, you'll work on deals, you'll work on tax disputes, you'll work on real estate transactions. So if it's an estate planning matter, you'll work on a trust. Someone is setting up a trust. So what are the tax implications of setting up a family trust for estate planning and succession planning purposes? So you get to interact with everything. Attention to detail is very important, because tax is one of those instances where if you actually mess up, it could have financial implications for your client. Like, I mean, all of them do have that, but tax is very direct. You told me if I do this, I will pay this. I'll pay 100. Now, I've done this, but I'm paying 250. What do I tell my investors? What do I tell my shareholders? And they took advice from you. So we check, we consult a lot within each other. We review each other's work. I'm more senior than Lucy in the office, but she will review my work just to ensure that, or she'll proofread my work and review it and she can question me and I can question her, and that's how it is, because we have to be very keen on the detail. And finally, I'd say, if you don't have tax experience, and I know our schools really do not teach tax properly, and I say this, I'm not in school now, but I say this because of what I see from the pupils that come to the farm, and the type of experience they have. They're very good at civil litigation. You tell them to draft for you an affidavit or an application to the tribunal to strike out a matter, they'll draft it very well. But you tell them now to, let's talk about tax. It's not taught, so there's a lot of reading and learning, and that's why I say, if you're interested, you can consider pursuing like a postgraduate diploma in tax by KRA. It'll give you the basic framework you can get to learn. And if you want to get to a law firm, you can go the route I went, go to a big four firm. They know how to teach basic tax. They won't teach you tax law, but they'll teach you operational tax, mathematical tax, and once you understand that, you'll be able to apply it to the law, and you'll be able to understand the law. You'll read the law as well, but not as much as we will read. And like, I've worked in both fields, and I know the advice I used to give clients in that. They'll be like, what are the tax implications? I'll tell them, okay, pay CGT at 15%, you'll pay stamp duty at 1%, and I sign off. And this is because, accounting firms are limited to the amount of legal advice they can offer, so they just stop it at that, and have very huge disclaimers that you cannot come after me, but you cannot come after them, and that's how they're very risk averse. But if you get to a law firm, this is first of all, advice is very privileged to your clients, and you can give them various deals. You can give them various structures they can choose. I just don't tell you CGT is at 15%. I'm like, CGT is at 15%, but you can take advantage of an exemption. If you go like this, if you set up this, if this is how you want to go about it, what do you want to do in the future? So it involves a lot. But in a nutshell, I think that's it. 33 minutes, 3 minutes over the 30 minutes allocated slot, but that's just a highlight of tax law and tax practice. I think it was important that you guys had it from lawyers and private practice as well. I think you've had it from KRA's side. It's important that you get this other side, and there's much more to tax, as you can see, or than just than just computing taxes and about numbers. So that's it. I'll now open it up for any questions, and I can answer, or we can answer the questions as they come, so that we don't take them. I don't want to have 5 questions. I don't have somewhere to write, and I don't want to forget anyone's questions.
My name is Genevieve Some. Thank you so much. That was a good presentation. In the previous session and this one, we've talked about tax dispute resolution processes, and of course it is very obvious that ADR is applicable. But then I want to know, are there tax disputes that cannot be resolved using ADR? Thank you.
Tax disputes, there's an ADR process, which is a mediation process that is structured. It is structured within KRA. We have a legal framework for it. We have the Tax Procedures Settlement Out of Court Regulations 2020, and these regulations are very clear in terms of the tax disputes that can be settled outside court, and particularly, I might remember some of them, but I'll refer you. I think it's Rule 7 of those rules that sets out the tax disputes that cannot be resolved at ADR, and this includes disputes that involve a matter of interpretation of law. We are sitting down with KRA. We've gone to court, and the matter involves interpretation of a law. we cannot then again, you see that we cannot again sit down with KRA to interpret the law or vary the law. That is for the court, and so that is clearly a matter that cannot be settled at ADR. You'll find disputes that have previously been referred to ADR and ADR discussions failed, where parties are trying to use ADR as a, to stop or to delay the dispute resolution mechanism. This is tax, this is money involved, so parties would want to delay the judgments as much as I can, because if I know I'm losing, if I know I have a bad case, I'd be like, why should a 100 million shilling judgment be issued against me? So I'll try to kick the can down the road, maybe kick it to the next financial year, because you see, because it's a number that may be paid out of my books. I could use it as a delay tactic, so the regulations envisage that. So I think there's also disputes that cannot be settled out at a year. I think those are the two I remember offered, but I refer you to Rule 7 of the tax procedures settlement out of court regulations. That'll answer you.
The question I had is not as technical, but given how niche being a tax lawyer is, and how niche-oriented the law market is becoming in terms of practice, do you have any tips on choosing what you want to do as a niche in future?
The reason I'm here is because I'm part of the learnership committee in the firm, and we're really invested in young lawyers and future talent, because the future of the firm ideally lies in lawyers coming in and others going. That's how it is, and young lawyers have to come in. So in choosing a practice group, I tell people not to come with a closed mind, especially when you come to, or you go to a firm or that has various practices, or even when you're in school, just explore as much as you can. Have an open mind. Don't have a closed mind towards something. I think I used to have a closed mind towards litigation myself, and I got to find that tax dispute resolution is my space, and that's where I like it. So if I had a closed mind about litigation, I really would not have enjoyed what I do and how I do it in tax litigation. So just have an open mind and explore as much as you can. Expose yourself as much as you can. The reason, the fact that you're here today actually shows that you have an intention to learn about the niche areas. I think the last session was about technology, media, and telecommunications, also a big space which is coming up. So just expose yourself as much as you can, read as much as you can, and have an open mind.
I'm here to be mentored. You can be a senior lawyer, but you don't know tax. So my name is Caroline Haswa. Allow me to just bring greetings also to all the participants from Nairobi branch, and to you. I am representing senior lawyers in Nairobi branch. Thank you very much. I have two questions and probably a comment. How can you help access to tax practice be as easy as access to criminal practice? Without necessarily using the word running down, how do we open up the tribunal so that anybody who has won the gown just from Supreme Court, you can go to the tax tribunal, listen in a bit, join yourself to some lawyer, even start as a researcher, because then you may not really have access to the big clients. But I believe if you start as a researcher, as an assistant to another lawyer, even on voluntary basis, that is the only way maybe you will really be able to learn and access other clients. How do we open that linkage? And of course, being in the branch, I'm also interested in how do we bring, more of these opportunities to the members. Then the second thing is that I caught something which you said, learning, cross-checking, caucusing among each other, and even doing like a moot or a private ruling. I think that is a very important area, which again, maybe it would also require for you to come up with a mini syllabus so that you can retrain all of us. Because I think that is one of the easiest ways to win a case. When I come to you as your colleague and I'm prosecuting, you're judging. Lawyers have forgotten about caucusing because, of course, lack of going to open court. What can you comment on that? And then the last one, I'm in the land sector, and I have dealt with many land matters, but just to give you context, our constitution provides for something called benefit sharing. Now, as a tax lawyer, today, somebody wants to put a building here. Generally, the Kenyan mind, they never think of how they are going to benefit from the tax that you're going to pay under the benefit sharing from the natural resource. Because soil, land, has not been unbundled as a natural resource. But I'm thinking there's a lot of gain to the citizens who live around Karen or who live in Umoja when you take there an investment and place it on land. But all this tax goes to the government. Where is the revenue that goes, the royalty to the inhabitants? Thank you.
From a real estate perspective and the benefits sharing aspect of it, yes, we do have taxes, and in fact, the government itself is a big beneficiary, because someone who is building here will incur a lot of VAT in buying materials, will incur a lot of might pay stamp duty if they're buying the land. The seller might pay CGT if they're paying if they made a capital gain on the land. In terms of benefit sharing and particularly how royalties from land and items beneath the land, like minerals, will be distributed to the communities, I think that's a bigger issue than tax, and it goes down to government expenditure. We have things like, and I'll give you an example. This might not be tied to land, but like the carbon policy and the carbon regulations and the carbon credits. It is envisaged that the communities should benefit ideally from people or investors doing carbon projects or projects that will sequester carbon from the environment. But how it is structured is the funds go first to the government, and how the government expends its funds, it's an issue about governance. It's generally an issue about governance and how the government expend its funds, and even, adherence to the laws and the rule of law. So that's a bigger issue than we can tackle in this discussion. But I hear you totally, and I agree with you totally. On to, how to make this more accessible to young lawyers who've just worn the gown and walked out of the Supreme Court. I think, in my view, and I'm quite passionate about this, in my view, it goes down to training, and training starts from our schools, because our curriculum, I just did a quick poll in this session as we started. Our curriculums in campuses are probably training lawyers for the 1990s. Yeah, so we have it's very few institutions in Kenya that are actually interested in training lawyers for the market that it is right now. A lot of lawyers are having to leave school and get outside here and have to retrain themselves on, let's say, the new practices that are coming up, because we can all not litigate and do land transactions and do land matters like what might have been the past in those days. We cannot, it's good to see nowadays, you can see a senior counsel who is a corporate lawyer. That's very nice. It shows that the practice is changing, and it goes down to training. What are our schools telling students about tax law? Are they telling them that there's opportunities in tax law? I've gone to various schools, and Strathmore is one school that is way ahead of the rest in terms of the investment they've put in their tax teams and the teams that train on tax. So I think we start from that. Once people or students have a basic working understanding of tax, and they get to School of Law, and there's perhaps some more knowledge on tax law and tax practice, then it becomes an easier conversation to have for someone who's just been admitted and their friend has a tax dispute. They can appear before the tribunal, and the tribunal is actually very open. Because accountants also appear before the tax appeals tribunal. So while there are a lot of you'll see very funny things from accountants, as opposed to, as a lawyer, you're used to court practice, and you dress up very well, you adhere to your regulations, and as trained as a lawyer. Yeah, from a Nairobi branch perspective and the general practice perspective, yes, lawyers do not caucus, but I think one thing maybe I've seen the LSK doing that is very nice is the CPDs. I've seen a lot of CPDs on tax. So for any lawyer in the room, or once the young lawyers are admitted, there are various CPD sessions on tax which some we have facilitated, which are very good to give lawyers knowledge, operational knowledge of how to do tax. Because, and at some point, it's also good for lawyers to understand that tax is very technical. It is not, yes, you might be a litigator and you might be a dispute resolution lawyer and the best in town, but a tax law sometimes has some commercial considerations. You might need to understand the financial implications, accounting. So what we ideally see even with other law firms is someone might have a dispute, but just work with, even if it's working with a tax accountant to enable you prepare your dispute well for your client, for the best interest of your client. Just get expertise. Lawyers need to stop the know-it-all attitude. I can do everything under the sun. You just need to accept that you may need help, and if you can't read it or get trained for it at that time, I guess the best next step is to either get advice from an accountant or someone who practices tax. And that is part of the caucusing, meeting up, discussing. I have a lot of friends who have their own law firms, and they reach out to me. I have this matter. This is the status of the matter. This is where the client is at. I think I have a bad case, but when we discuss with them, you find instances where they can be able to reverse or make a better outcome for their client that they did not know about because they're not involved in the day-to-day tax practice. They may be involved in legal practice, but not tax practice. Is there any other question before we close it up? I guess there's none other question. So I think from Lucy and myself, we thank you guys. Thank you all, and happy to interact for a few minutes if you want to ask any further questions, and have the great rest of the day in the sessions. Thank you.